Start your day with It's the Business. Here's Phil Dobbie.
Today, just how many airlines will survive if COVID-19 drags on? Well, today, Simon Calder, travel editor at The Independent, explains that not all airlines are created equal.
Yeah, the Ryanair and Easyjet at the right price, I'd put money into Ryanair, for goodness sake. They will always, because of their incredibly robust business model, they will always have a future.
But then there's the others like Alitalia who hoover up government money and have got used to that. But it's not just COVID-19 hurting the travel industry. If you look at the inbound travel market, that's got Brexit to contend with as well.
Clearly, there's about 100 million Europeans who might come to the UK who haven't got passports, because why would you bother? Because you can go to dozens of countries without one. Are you really going to bring this in just at the point where you're desperately hoping people come back to the UK and this will be putting a large slab of them off? And they said, yes, we are.
Well, it's going to be a very cloudy summer for UK tourism, inbound and outbound. We'll look at that on the show today. Plus, Tesla doing well. But what's this fixation with Bitcoin? It's Tuesday, the 27th of April, 2021. Good morning.
And now, it's The Business, making sense of it all with Phil Dobbie.
Yes, very quickly before we talk travel, Tesla announced its first quarter earning results yesterday after the markets closed in the United States. And first quarter profits, they boasted $438 million. That's about £315 million. But the numbers are somewhat muddied by the purchase of Bitcoin. Do you remember that they bought $1.5 billion of Bitcoin? Then they sold a chunk of it, which contributed $101 million to its revenues. And now you can buy Tesla cars with Bitcoin, so they can accumulate more. They say they are in Bitcoin for the long haul. And I know Bitcoiners are adamant, aren't they, that it's going to keep its value. It's only going to keep coming up. Someone the other day said to me they expect that it's going to go up eightfold. This is crazy stuff. But remember, it can go down as well. It went from around 46,000 down to 35,000 earlier this month, which is almost a quarter of its value. Can you imagine Tesla's balance sheet? If it was all Bitcoin, it would be all over the place. Would you invest in a company that had such a high level of volatility, which has got nothing whatsoever to do with what they produce? So they could have the best cars in the world. Many would say, I've driven one. They are marvelous things. But imagine if the whole company came crashing down because of its exposure to Bitcoin. This is just crazy stuff, isn't it? But anyway, there we are. You have to wonder how much of it is transitory, how much of Bitcoin is because people have saved money during the lockdown and they want some passive income. The passive income that everyone craves. You can't get it, by the way. You still have to work to make some money. But, the idea of passive income, it is much easier than hard work, isn't it? And there are people who've got a bit of spare cash, particularly the Bitcoin fraternity, it seems. So I just don't get it. And Elon Musk's fascination with it, I don't get either. Although I do know that he pulled out $300 million worth of money out of the company in the first quarter, whilst Bitcoin and Tesla's share price were riding high. So just a bit of spending money there for Elon, just the $300 million for this quarter. So today, what about the plight of the travel industry? Well, the good news is only 11 people died in the UK in the latest daily figures as a result of coronavirus, or within 28 days of testing positive for the coronavirus. I mean, they might be knocked down by a bus, coincidentally. Israel had 2 deaths in a day. The UAE, which is in the red zone for travel to the UK, also only had 2, although I expect that UAE is in the red zone because it's an airline hub and it's to stop people coming to the UK from places like South Africa and India, I guess, which had over 350,000 new cases in a day reported yesterday. It really is getting quite ugly over there. And yet Ursula Von der Leyen from the European community has said tourism in Europe will open up for double vaccine recipients. So she told this to the New York Times. The EU is prepared to welcome visitors from the US and anywhere else in the world, including the UK, obviously, so long as they have an approved vaccine, which approved is those approved by the EMA, which is all the vaccines that we're issuing in this country. The 27 member states of the EU will accept unconditionally all those who've been vaccinated with those vaccines. Of course, right now, that doesn't really matter too much because in the UK, you're not allowed to travel anywhere unless you've got a really good reason. And there is a hope that that will be lifted on May the 17th, but there's no guarantee. It's not actually in the official timetable that Boris outlined. Travel wasn't given an open update, but we are told to expect in early May a 3-tier traffic light system for travel, which would mean green means you can you can go, but you'll need to test before you go and test on arrival back in the UK. Amber means you'll have to quarantine for 10 days on return, and red, a bit like now, you have to quarantine at a hotel at a cost of £1,750 per person for 11 days, which actually, I remember saying this before, it's not bad really, but what a shame you can't go out and use the pool and the sauna and all the other facilities. You've got to stay stuck in your bedroom. So right now, we've got to assume that a lot of Europe is going to be amber. If you look at the infection rates, I mean, we have 81,000 active cases of COVID-19 right now. That's 1 in 833. In Spain, it's 1 in 205, so 4 times worse than us. And in Italy, 1 in 133, 8 times worse than us. In France, 1 in 65. Close to 1 million people have got COVID-19 in France right now. You'd have to wonder, in fact, why it's not a red list country. Actually, looking at those numbers, I mean, the double problem for France is a lot of people just don't want to get vaccinated. So you'd have to assume that that is going to be amber. So none of this bodes well for the travel industry. That week in Mallorca, for example, could be followed by almost 2 weeks stuck at home when you get back. And 5 weeks ago, I spoke with airline industry strategist John Strickland on the podcast about the industry that really is going through tough times right now. He said at the time he was surprised that we haven't seen more airlines go to the wall, but they do seem to be muddling through somehow, which is perhaps a reflection of how good the good times were before the pandemic struck and the extent to which larger airlines can now raise more capital to get by on the assumption that good times will be again soon. But how soon will we have good times again? Not in a hurry, it seems. But we also know some airlines are on the brink of collapse as well. And the more delays there are to travel this summer, the worse it is going to get. So let's have a look at the state of the industry now with Simon Calder, who is, without a doubt, the most heard man on travel in the British Isles. He's a senior travel editor at The Independent. So we've got Alitalia, Simon, on the brink of collapse. The Italian government is hoping to bail them out, for which they have to get approval from the European Commission. But my understanding is, I mean, it's basically gone back into public hands. So do you think we'll see a lot more renationalisation of airlines?
Right. Let's start with Alitalia, because Alitalia is always a complete outlier. I think there was a year, I think it was a complete aberration, but I think it may have been something like 1985 when it made a profit. This is just an absolute basket case. It has been for decades. By all business measures, it should have just collapsed decades ago, and you would now have a flourishing new airline largely based in Italy. It hasn't collapsed entirely because the Italian government has found various ways of keeping it afloat with ludicrous subsidies. It's one of these things, and I guess there'll be echoes of Air France there as well, where it's I call it too Italian to fail. They simply will not let it collapse.
But it has a start. There's a startup now, isn't there? So they've got Ego starting up. So you would have thought anybody coming along, if it's so badly run, anyone coming along as we come out of this pandemic is going to be worse news for them then, isn't it?
Well, yes, but I mean, EasyJet and Ryanair have been embedded in Italy for so long that effectively, if you want in normal times to have a decent fare on a decent airline, you would be flying on EasyJet or Ryanair domestically as well as internationally from there. But there are all kinds of advantages that have been built in for it. I guess the most significant one would be that you have the slots at Milan Linate, which is absolutely the most preferable of the three Milan airports. Malpensa is miles out to the northwest. Bergamo is actually in another city. So Linate, which is, on a good day, 10 minutes away from the Duomo, absolutely top choice. And the rules for having slots there are basically you can only have you only get the slots you want if you're if your name has 8 letters beginning and ending with A. It's almost that.
Right. So, right. Okay. So a bit of preferential treatment, which is partially explains why they're still.
Let's leave.
Partly explains why they're still around then. But what about new entrants? I mean, the two questions then, which are almost the first questions I started with. Is Alitalia the only one then, or are we going to see other airlines struggling? And what about startups? Are we going to see many new startups coming as well?
Right. Okay, and those things are, as you will appreciate, completely related in the sense that, we, as your excellent introduction stated, we've had an awful lot of money going into existing airlines, and that is partly because they were very profitable, at least in the case of someone like IAG, the holding company of British Airways. Because, ultimately, it made, 1.9 billion pounds in the last proper financial results. They had fantastically built-in advantages in terms of the largest number of slots at Heathrow, all kinds of reasons why, well-run, tightly run airline. They went into this, as did Easyjet, as did Ryanair, extremely robust in terms of their business model, in terms of their slots, in terms of their fleets, crew, and so on. And obviously, you have to kind of take as read all airlines, like any big companies, any small companies, are going to take full advantage of all the standard furlough opportunities and cheap loans and so on.
Sure.
So they've been doing that, but what they absolutely signally have not been getting is public funds. Simultaneously, you have Air France, KLM being bailed out proportionately, so probably about 3/4 France, 1/4 Netherlands by those respective governments. Lufthansa, again, effectively here you are. Tell us how much cash. Tell us to stop. Tell us when you can let us stop pouring money in. And they are going to emerge, relatively speaking, stronger because all the time that you haven't got public subsidies, you are relying on more and more, as it were, goodwill from the investors who are putting money in. And of course, they are simply looking at, if they've got any sense, they're looking at long-term prospects, and they are thinking, right, what can this company offer us in terms of long-term earnings and success? And for let's say the first year, it was clear that BA was going to be in a good position, but very much what's happened now is that because the planned summer restart is in such disarray. Yeah. You've now got investors who are thinking, actually, so we're burning through cash at whatever it is, pick your airline, $25 million a day or whatever, large figures. They're burning through that, and we were letting them burn through that because we knew that things were going to pick up, and we thought, we might have a break-even summer, and then we'd be able to sort of go into winter, cope with that, and then things will all be better again by 2023, 2024. And that is now looking less and less likely. So therefore, you've got less willingness to put money in.
It's going to be the airlines that have got the most. By the way, you were starting to get a bit of wind noise now, so you're up in the air yourself. But you're in the centre of London. I know. So, isn't it going to be a case then that whichever countries have been prepared to support their national airlines the most are the ones that potentially are going to come out of this the best? And with the exception of that one that you mentioned that happens to be based in Italy, which is going to be a basket case anyway. But Lufthansa and airlines like that are probably going to have a head start because they've had so much public money put in, even if we do go through what you're now saying is going to be a pretty rocky summer.
Yeah, I mean the national governments that have put money in will continue to put money in. They won't see it as throwing good money after that. They'll see it as we have to have a really big and important aviation sector in France and Germany, and that rather speaks to the fact that. the UK, for everything that aviation ministers have said, has had a...
So they're more reticent to do it. Is that what you're saying?
There is exactly. I was just trying to think how I could frame it fairly. There is no appetite whatsoever for making life at all easy for the airlines. We went into this
because we're not prepared to give the support that the Europeans are giving, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because the whole thing about Brexit was that there should be a level playing field, and there shouldn't be any state support unless it's level across all countries, ourselves included in this new agreement.
Well, let's subtract coronavirus. We'd now be talking about why is UK aviation doing so badly, and it would be as a result of the of Brexit, which was very, very destructive to the airline industry. And this is, we're kind of coming back to your original question, which is who will survive? Yeah, the Ryanair and Easyjet will. At the right price, I'd put money into Ryanair, for goodness sake. They will always, because of their incredibly robust business model, they will always have a future. EasyJet also look pretty good, but they are substantially weakened by Brexit. It reduces a lot of their operational flexibility. The recession that I think we will see absent coronavirus anyway in the UK will obviously hit them, but they will survive. But it's just every day it's looking smaller and weaker, and that's playing out right across the aviation sector. Now, therefore, you might think, okay, well, plenty of room for startups. But, while EasyJet was sort of started on a wing and a prayer, in terms of, a couple of borrowed aircraft and, some orange paint, it did have the benefit of being started by a millionaire whose dad was happy to advance him some capital.
Always nice, isn't it? And then imagine if you're starting an airline now, the pressure would be on not getting older aircraft on the cheap, but actually getting new aircraft because of the cost of fuel is going to be, you're competing against airlines that are, flying with more fuel efficient aircraft.
Well, yes, and we've seen, well, the thing is though, I mean, right, so you come to me and you say, I'm starting this new airline. How's it going to be different from Lufthansa and Air France and EasyJet and Ryanair? Well, I think I can get my prices below any of them because I'm going to be flying effectively aircraft for which there is almost zero cost of ownership because so many aircraft are available. And therefore the lease rates have gone through the floor for older aircraft. The trouble is, and it's not easy to see a way in for anybody here, the maintenance costs go through the roof when you've got older aircraft. So, and there's one more aspect which I don't think has been talked about so much. You need slots to fly out of airports, and the existing airlines have basically got slot waivers, and that's might sound a dull technical term, but it basically just means slots are normally done on a use it or lose it basis. So if Dobbie Air has 10 slots at Heathrow, and for more than 20% of the time you don't use those slots, you just lose them because clearly it's a waste of a very valuable asset. Now, the airlines have been given slot waivers, and the government in the UK and the EU as well said, we're viewing this to be, because it's really, really customer friendly, we're making sure that these airlines are protected so they can fly us again. Well, might be in one sense customer friendly, but it's not allowing new entrants to come in. And so you've got this ludicrous situation where you've got a kind of almost a wacky races going on at Heathrow with loads of new airlines coming in, but they've got slots just for one season or maybe 2 seasons, as opposed to long-term rights, and so
hard to build a business model based on that, isn't it?
Yeah, because but by next year, BA comes back and says, actually, we'll have those slots back now.
Yeah.
And so,
we have got all these new airlines starting up. So I mentioned Ego, which is out of Italy. Maybe a bad time. Flypop, for example, flying to India from Stansted. Actually, for the VFR, for the visiting friends and relatives market. Actually, couldn't be a worse time to launch that airline. I wouldn't have thought.
No, and let's kind of mark down this time next year when we discuss how well Ego and Flypop are doing. I would, even in normal times, I don't think that their business models are going to survive. I mean, if you look at the Indian VFR market, it's really important. It's really good, but you're getting airlines such as India coming in and doing routes such as Stansted Amritsar. And that's, you've also got the incredible flows through the Gulf in normal times. So, for instance, last time I went to Mumbai, I went on Gulf Air, changed planes in Bahrain, perfectly pleasant. There's huge amounts of capacity there. And I'm not sure what you are bringing to the table, because I can't sort of see you getting the price down much below about sort of average of £450, £500 maybe return. And since, without too much trouble, I can get that anyway, and I can probably get it from an airport nearer where I need to be in India and to an airport nearer I need to be in the UK going through the Gulf, I'm probably going to go for that. So, I wish them well. Of course, competition is great. But I don't think that I've not seen any startups emerging where I thought, wow, I can absolutely see that being a success.
Yeah, well, particularly at this time, of course. So this summer, then, is it going to be a bad one? I mean, we're talking about vaccine passports, but of course we've also got this rising cases in Europe as well. People aren't going to want to go if they have to quarantine on return, even if they're allowed in. I know you're not. None of us are experts at the way this virus is going to mutate itself. But what's your take on what this summer's going to be like?
Oh, well, the summer's going to be dreadful and the winter's going to be worse. Sorry, I'm a natural optimist. Anybody connected with the travel industry has to be. But unfortunately, looking at the whole sector, you need a really strong leisure sector in the summer, and you need really strong business bookings in the winter. And the summer is just getting further and further away about when we're going to have a meaningful restart. And in terms of business travel restarting, well, how many reasons do you want? Well, you've got airline, you've got businesses themselves who will be strapped for cash, and a good way to cut back is on business travel, particularly if you've proved that actually you can get by on Zoom.
Well, there's been a whole reevaluation, hasn't there? Really, I think in the business world in terms of business travel generally, and we might get back to where we were, but I think my take is that it's going to take years and years and years if we ever actually do get back there.
Yeah, what we will get, I think, is maybe 60% of what we previously had, because people will still want to travel. A lot of people actually see it as a perk, not getting up at 4:00 in the morning, driving to Heathrow, flying to Frankfurt and so on, but they see it as a perk being able to get across to America and have a week away and eat out in great restaurants and so on, and collect some frequent flyer points as well. But if you were having meetings somewhere a long way away every month or so, that will probably decrease to maybe every couple of months, or every 3 months, or twice a year, and so you are going to see less business travel. There'll also be the element where I think a lot of companies will take the duty of care very seriously and say, actually, we don't want to send our executives to these places, because if they catch coronavirus, that's down to us.
So what about inbound then? The delights of a domestic, well, I mean, inbound and domestic. I mean, obviously, a lot of us are going to be heading down to God knows what the queues are going to be like down to the West Country this summer. Worse than they normal, and that's pretty bad. But are we going to also see people coming into the country as well? Do you think?
No.
No.
We'll be in for a good summer in most respects, but it will be. It won't make up for the lack of inbound travel. So although the balance of payments is about £25 billion, we spend more on going abroad than people spend coming here. You might think, oh, well, so if everyone's staying here, that's £25 billion bonus for the economy. It doesn't work like that, because a lot of that money, of the inbound tourism money, is people paying £500 a night in 5-star hotels in London because they don't want to be in the Gulf in August. That's not coming in. And the government has shown almost no interest in rebuilding inbound tourism whatsoever. And so that's going to be so tough.
I tell you what,
the rules...
for an optimist, you are painting a very pessimistic picture here.
Well, I know, but I mean, let me give you one aspect that I checked this week. So, as part of Brexit, this whole idea of, we don't really like Johnny Foreign, we don't really trust him. So we're going to make it tougher for people to get in. So, therefore, there used to be a serious problem with some EU countries' ID cards. That's now gone, and they are now very, very secure, and they're as good as a passport. But because Vote Leave was absolutely, we're going to stop people being able to get in on ID cards. We're going to have, you're going to have a passport to come in. That the government has mandated that. That comes into effect in October. I said to the Home Office this week, are you seriously going to do this? Because clearly there's about 100 million Europeans who might come to the UK who haven't got passports, because why would you bother? Because you can go to dozens of countries without one. Are you really going to bring this in just at the point where you're desperately hoping people come back to the UK, and this will be putting a large slab of them off? And they said, yes, we are. I mean, it just beggars belief.
Well, and beggars belief that we actually pushed ahead with Brexit in the middle of all of this, doesn't it? Rather than delaying the transition period. I think you and I are talking from the same argument, from the same hymn sheet on this one. So just a couple of things, just very quickly, just before we go, I'll let you get on. Two stories which I loved. One wasn't in your paper. I think it was in the FT over the weekend. But all these hotels that are now so keen to try and get some of the self-catering business, they're actually putting self-catering lodges in their grounds so you can use the hotel pool and that sort of stuff, and the restaurant. But I guess it's innovation, I guess.
Oh, sure, yeah. And they're pushing it as far as they can. I absolutely celebrate that. And I've had quite a lot of really furious businesses talking to me saying we are a perfectly respectable apart hotel. So we've got completely self-catering apartments. We just happen to be accessed from the same corridor. Now people can go into a supermarket and mix with 1,000 different people. Yeah. But the fact that there will be the 30-second possibility of an encounter in the corridor means that we cannot open. It's absolutely
you can see their point of view. Absolutely, yeah. And then the other thing which I thought was crazy was there, and I think this was yours, that cruising, this bizarre story that you can go on a cruise from next month around Britain, but you can't get off at any port. You can't mingle very much on the cruise. I was thinking, well, I really don't get the point. If you can't get off anywhere, why not travel around the Mediterranean, where at least you'll get some sunshine, rather than braving it off the Shetland Islands? Because the Foreign Office is saying, do not go on a cruise abroad and validate your insurance. And you can't go on a cruise without insurance. It's a mad summer. These are just the cruise industry. Crikey, we haven't even started talking about that yet. Another day. But that is in utter disrepair. And you've got these. You've got £1 billion ship, which quite possibly is now worth 200 million, if that. So there's still some value in the assets, but the business model is shot. And if I were thinking of starting up anything, I would be looking at cruise, actually getting some really cheap assets, and then coming up with a fresh idea. So it does
appeal to a wider spectrum of people, shall we say, who do recognise it as a perfectly good way of getting around the Mediterranean. But you want to be able to, you don't want to set sail at 6 o'clock, because 6 o'clock in Nice is exactly the time that things come alive, and you want to be out and about and enjoying yourself. So I think there's room in cruising, but it's an absolute mess of an industry.
Yeah, so an opportunity to get in while it's cheap if you want to buy the assets. Yeah, get that. Yeah. And actually, that's an interesting answer to a question I was going to ask you, which is, if you're going to put money into any travel business right now, where would you put it? Would you put it into I was thinking you'd ride off cruises. Would you put it into an airline? Would you put it into a chalet in the south of France, or would you put it into some sort of domestic business?
Look, okay, so let's run through them. Airlines, I would never ever put money into to any of them unless.
Well, maybe you would if the share price was very low.
Property, hotels are going to be really interesting because they're still building them where I am in London, and it's difficult to know who's going to stay there with business travel so badly hit with Brexit and everything. But I don't know that there's enough guests to go around, so certainly not the hotel industry. Yeah, I'd say cruising. You can pick up some interesting assets really cheaply, and I think there is a possible new business model for cruising, but nobody goes into the travel industry to make money, and very few people who invest in the travel industry make money.
I know.
So
yeah, exactly. I worked in this industry many years ago, and I know they're all in it for the love of it. They've got crazy ways of making no money at all, but they seem very happy to do it. Look, Simon, it's been great to have you on today. I hope we can do it again in a month or so, when we're in the midst of that summer, and we can reevaluate where we all are. But you're painting a fairly maudlin picture, I guess, at the moment. But
longer term, we're talking 2030, and I think things will be, they'll be
back to those halcyon days.
They'll be good. Most of the time. I mean, travel is generally very benign, very successful. Anyway,
excellent. There we are. We just have to wait till 2030, and it'll be fabulous. Yeah. Good to talk to Simon.
Thanks a million. Bye.
Very quickly, let's have a quick look at what's in the newspapers this morning, so you don't have to go out and buy them. And I wouldn't bother if I was you, because they're basically all telling the same story. It's all about, very much focused on Boris's comment, supposedly, that we should let the bodies pile high. He allegedly said in late October, early November, that he'd rather do that than have another lockdown. That was the lockdown before Christmas. Of course, he then went on to create a much bigger lockdown after Christmas. The Express sides with Boris, not surprisingly. PM brands allegations total rubbish, it says. But the Mirror, going the other way, says now 3 people say Johnson did make those remarks. Front of the Times as well, Johnson said he would let COVID rip in lockdown row. The Independent, Johnson hits back at leaks. Boris on the ropes, says the Daily Mail. PM fights to move on from leaks, says the Daily Telegraph. And The Guardian, pressure on Johnson after claim of slur on COVID dead. And PM tainted by sleaze, says voters, front of the Eye today. So thank God we've got the FT, the only newspaper which is not actually covering it front and centre this morning. Instead, it's got a story about Lex Greensill. Before he started Greensill Capital, we know he worked for the government in the Cabinet Office. The story there is the fact that he was offered a desk in the Cabinet Office with no job description, no job title. He must be a very charismatic individual, mustn't he, to have gone from small town Oz to the Cabinet Office to starting his own finance company and losing it in just a few small steps. I mean, he's still a fairly young lad. Plus, on the FT front page, Brussels sues AstraZeneca for alleged breach of EU vaccine supply promises. Like, that's a good use of time and money right now. They obviously, they are complaining that they haven't got the supplies that were promised. AstraZeneca is saying, well, we did say it would be on a best effort basis, and you did put your order in late. So they're going to the courts over that now. Please. That's it for today. Back again tomorrow. Vicky Price is going to join us, and we're going to take a bit of a stock take on that story that would almost certainly be dominating the news this year if it wasn't for COVID-19. The numbers behind Brexit, they don't look good. See you tomorrow morning.
It's the Business with Phil Dobbie. Listen online at itsthebusiness or wherever good